Hi, today I want to talk a little bit about sweet wines. This is something that's not one of my favorite things to drink, but you know, a lot of people do like sweet wines and they should know a little bit about them. So, starting out in the spirit of that, today I have a Moscato. This one is out of Italy. So Moscato is one of the more popular sweet wines currently. Let me get a sip of this. Okay, now I have to say, like I said, I'm not a sweet wine drinker by choice, but it's by preference, I guess, but really not choice. But I do like the flavor of Moscato, and I would dearly love to find one that's dry instead of sweet. So that said, it's just got some nice notes to it, but if I try and drink a whole big glass of it, it's just too much for me personally. A lot of people love it. It's just, you know, their candy of choice, and more power to them. I sell a lot of Moscato, and people do really enjoy it. So now that said, you really want to, if you're going to drink sweet wines, you want to get a good one. So what makes a good sweet wine? Let's first of all talk about what a sweet wine is. So when you are out in the vineyard and you're picking your grapes, they're all ripe, and you bring them in and you squeeze the juice out of them. So you end up with a bunch of juice. You know, here's your juice, and you've got like this much sugar in it, and you've got that much alcohol. So what happens, where does that juice go from sweet, unfermented juice to alcoholic wine? So what happens, you start with your sugar up here, and over on this side you've got your alcohol, which is down at the bottom. As it ferments, the yeast converts the sugar to alcohol. So those two, after fermentation finishes, have reverse position. So now at this point, with your alcohol up here, your sugar is basically zero. If it ferments fully all the way out, you've got no sugar, but you've got a lot of alcohol. That's not a sweet wine, that's a dry wine. So how does it become sweet? Well, what happens then, a couple different things can happen. One of them is keep the alcohol up here, and you just add a bunch of sugar to it to bring the sweetness up. And that's the bad way to make it, because you're just adding sugar not in a good way. There is a process called chaptalization. Basically that means you're adding sugar to the raw juice because the harvest had to come in really earlier. It was you just didn't have enough time to build up the sugar. It got cold too fast, something like that. That is allowed in some of the more northern European winemaking regions, but that's a whole different reason for adding it. You've got the actual juice, it just doesn't have enough sugar in it to fully ferment the way it should. Okay, so back to sweet wines. You've got one, you've got all the sugar up here, then you ferment it, and all that sugar converts to alcohol, or whichever way I add it. So to get it to be sweet then, you can add sugar. Again, wrong way to do it. The other method you can do is, as it's going through that process, when it hits a certain point, you can stop fermentation. Well, sometimes that's easier said than done, and it's not always the way it's done. It can be done that way. Different ways to stop it and keep it going, or keep it the way you want it. But another method that's used is start with the sugar juice up here, alcohol here, and let it go all the way. Then take some raw juice, unfermented, add it back in, and then, you know, if you got it 50-50, well, then you get half the alcohol and then half the original sugar, so it tastes sweet and still has some alcohol in it. And that's kind of how it can be made. Those are the different methods, basically 3 of them. What you need to, the takeaway on that is your sweet wines, the better made ones, should have a lower alcohol than a comparable red or white wine. So what I mean by that, we're talking alcohol by volume, and that's expressed as a percentage on the bottle, and it's usually difficult to find. I should say that's a requirement in the US. I don't know if it's required elsewhere, but to sell any wine or any alcohol product, you have to have that percent of alcohol by volume. So ALC, alcohol Is that right? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Oh, ALC is abbreviation for alcohol. But anyway, alcohol by volume as a percentage. This one is, if I recall correctly from having found it before, is yeah, 5%. They're teeny tiny print. So where you compare that to a typical white wine, this being Moscato is white, compared to another white wine, let's say a Chardonnay or a Pinot Grigio, something like that, you're going to find the alcohol level is usually 12.5% or higher. Generally you don't see them at 15 on a white, but in theory you could. So it's got roughly a third or half the alcohol compared to a dry wine. Dry basically means the sugar's all fermented out and it's not sweet anymore. So sweet and dry are opposite in the wine world. So what makes a sweet wine? Well, sugar makes it sweet. If it's ideally a good sweet wine is one that is made using natural sugar from the juice itself. Either add more juice in to sweeten it up or stop fermentation before it's gone full dry. So that's what I would look for. So the key thing there, the easiest way to get a good idea if it's sugar added or not, if it's a sweet wine and it's high alcohol, then sugar added. You know, stay away from those. Go to something that's been a little bit more naturally produced, and you'll have a much better wine. That's why I stock here, because I do want the best wine for my customers. And I've had a number of sweet wine drinkers comment on the fact that, oh yes, this Moscato is so much better than the others I've had. And well, I know the others they've had are the cheap, crappy ones. And we won't name names here, but those certain wines know who they are, and they're mass-produced. There's no hand care, crafting going into them, so they taste that way. It's like fast food, only wine. So look for the better quality wines. You'll be much happier with that than you will be with just mass-produced garbage. And this is true in not only sweet wines, but dry wines too. Look for the wines that have some care that went into them, hand-picked, hand-processed. The vineyard is run by the owner type thing, and it's not, or it's a family type outfit. Those, they really do make the best wine because it's their name on them a lot of times. So sweet wines, yeah, find some good ones. Moscato being the current favorite. There are others out there. Sweet red wines are kind of coming into play. Italy does some amazing sweet wines. There's other regions too, but Italy kind of takes the cake for a lot of them. If you look back a bit in wine history from now, previously your sweet wines were going backwards were the white Zinfandel. That was a big one for a long time. It's been kind of supplanted with Moscato lately. Before that, you had a lot of the sweet German wines, predominantly Riesling, and then things like Peace Porter, Liefermelch, what else? Those are the only ones I can think of right off the top of my head. But back in the 70s, sweet German wines were the rage. The other sweet wine categories, you do have some actual dessert type wines. I mean, when I say dessert in this sense, the wine is the dessert. You don't eat it with dessert, it is dessert. Some of those would be a Sauterne out of the Bordeaux region of France. Very sweet wine. It's almost syrupy, and it's different every year. It's slightly different. You can't have the same characteristic aside from flavor and sweetness. But very good wines, but in very small doses. You're thinking, rather than having a glass of one of those, you basically have a shot. Kind of drink it like a whiskey, except it's in a shot quantity. You don't have to drink it out of a shot glass. Very good. Another one is, again in German, I'll probably mutilate this, but Trockenbeeren Auslese. Trockenbeeren Auslese, I think it is pronounced, something like that. It's the very late harvest after the frost, and it's a little bit similar in that respect to a Sauterne. Sauterne relies a little bit more on a mold or fungus that grows on the grape, whereas the TBA, Trockenbeeren Auslese, are that's the abbreviation, TBA for that. Those are late harvest, so the sugar is concentrated because the water part of the grape is basically frozen and evaporated away. So again, those are different production methods, but also very sweet and drink in small quantities. It's not something you want a big glass of. Often those are sold in splits, which is half of a regular bottle size. This being 750, this would be 375 milliliter. So there are some really good sweet wines out there, and if you take the time to find them, the Sauternes and TBA, those tend to be more expensive. But if you're looking for a Moscato or a sweet Riesling or something else along that line, you can find them. Just look for the ones that are not super high in alcohol, but also have that sweetness to them. So I hope that helps you on your quest for sweetness or your quest to find a sweet wine for someone else who does like them if you don't. So cheers, and here's my Moscato for the month. Again, this Moscato does have a good flavor. It just gets, it's even with that small amount, second sip, it's a little too sweet for me. But anyway, if you like Moscato, more power to you, and enjoy your wine no matter what it is. And again, cheers.